A man was sitting on the rooftop of his own house in Karachi, Pakistan, late at night, moving his fingers very fast over a transistor. While doing this, he was repeatedly looking down into the street from his rooftop because he had probably realized that this night could be his last night and his game was about to end. This was because in the street of Karachi, where his house was located, the movement of Pakistan Army vehicles had increased for some time, and the soldiers of the Pakistan Army were going door to door, making people open their houses and searching every home. But the only good thing for that man was that even during all this, he still had a little time left because his house was the last one in that street. The street itself was narrow and quiet, with old buildings on both sides and very few lights, which made it easier for any unusual movement to be noticed immediately. That night, however, the silence of the street had been broken by the sound of heavy vehicles, boots on the ground, and loud knocks on doors. By the time those Pakistan Army soldiers would reach his doorstep, and just before he heard the knock on his door, he had already completed his work. But as soon as he realized that the soldiers had reached his house, he quickly took that transistor and threw it inside the water tank kept on the rooftop of his house, so that in any situation, no such evidence could be found by the soldiers that could fail his mission even after his arrest. At that moment, he was not as worried about getting caught, but he was only afraid that the secret code he had just sent across the border to India through that transmission should not fall into the hands of the Pakistan Army. His breathing was heavy, but his hands were steady, which showed that he had already accepted whatever was about to happen next. Now, I know that you must be thinking why a man living in Karachi, Pakistan, would send a secret code to India, and if he was sending it, what was his real identity, and what was so important in that code that he was risking his life to send it to India? So listen. This story begins in the 1970s, a time when tensions between India and Pakistan had increased a lot because East Pakistan, which is now known as Bangladesh, wanted to separate from Pakistan and become an independent country, and India was fully supporting it. Because of this, Pakistan was irritated that India was helping East Pakistan separate from it, and this tension eventually turned into the War of 1971, in which both countries fought against each other. The situation at that time was extremely tense, and both countries were preparing for a long and intense conflict. But in that same war, the uncle of this man who lived in Karachi went missing. The man I mentioned at the beginning of this video, who was sending a secret message to India through a transistor that night, his name was RF Qureshi, and his uncle was serving in the Pakistan Army, who went missing during the 1971 war. The Pakistan Army never gave any information about him to the family. Neither was he declared a martyr, nor was anything told about him. Because of this, a deep resentment developed in the mind of Arif Qureshi towards the Pakistani army and Pakistan itself, and he wanted to take revenge in any possible way. This incident affected him deeply, and over time, that pain slowly turned into anger, and that anger later became hatred. Now, Arif Qureshi used to work as a radio mechanic in Karachi. He had a small shop in the old market of Karachi where people came to him to repair their transistors, wireless sets, and old tape recorders. His shop was small but well known in the area, and he was considered skilled at his work. But in the past 2 to 3 years, so much hatred had developed in his mind towards Pakistan that even while working, he used to remain frustrated, and sometimes he even got angry at customers. Along with this, he used to speak against the Pakistan Army to everyone because such hatred had settled in his mind that he could go to any extent. People around him noticed his behavior, but most of them ignored it, thinking that he was just a frustrated man dealing with personal loss. During this time, India's intelligence agency, RAW, had been formed only 3 to 4 years ago, but even then, some of its spies had already reached Pakistan. And one of those spies noticed Arif Qureshi. Seeing so much hatred in his mind towards the Pakistan army, he thought of using him as an asset. But it was not easy to trust any Pakistani so quickly because Raw also feared that it could be a trap of Pakistan intelligence agency ISI. It was possible that Arif was already an ISI agent who was speaking against Pakistan in front of people to trap Raw agents. Because of this, he was kept under observation for months. Different Raw agents used to visit his shop as customers to get their devices repaired. They observed his behavior, his reactions, and his consistency. After months of research, when they were sure that Arif could be made an agent, one evening, some Raw agents met him and explained everything to him. At first, Arif was terrified to even hear about spying against his own country, but the hatred he had for the Pakistani government eventually made him agree. His decision was not sudden, but it was driven by years of pain and unanswered questions. By that time, General Zia had taken control in Pakistan and martial law had been imposed. After Zia came to power, the ISI was given extra power, and because of this, surveillance increased in Karachi, especially on communication. ISI had received information that Indian spies in Pakistan were using transistors to send messages to India, so they were keeping a close watch on communication. Monitoring activities were increased, and suspicious signals were being tracked regularly. But Arif, being a radio mechanic for many years, found this work easy. He used to send secret information to India through different frequencies, like the unusual movement of warships, military convoy directions, and activities at Karachi port, all in coded messages. However, he also knew that the risk was increasing. Still, his job as a radio mechanic acted as a perfect cover because working with frequencies was part of his profession and no one suspected him easily. One day, after returning home, he received shocking news. His younger brother, Imran Qureshi, had joined the ISI. Imran was always good in studies and was passionate about serving his country. After martial law, when ISI recruitment increased, he applied and got selected. The family was proud, and Arif pretended to be happy. But deep inside, he realized that now his every step was in danger. This situation made his work even more complicated, because now he had to be careful not only outside, but also inside his own home.
However, this situation was not entirely a disadvantage for Arif. In fact, in some ways, it turned into an unexpected opportunity. After completing his training, his younger brother Imran Qureshi was posted at the Karachi port, which was considered one of the most sensitive and strategically important locations in Pakistan. This meant that Imran now had access to information that was not available to ordinary citizens. For Arif, this created a new possibility, although it also increased the danger significantly. At home, everything appeared normal. The family would sit together for dinner, talk about daily life, and discuss small household matters. But for Arif, every conversation had a hidden purpose. He would carefully guide discussions in such a way that Imran would unknowingly reveal small but important pieces of information. Sometimes it was about unusual naval movement, sometimes about changes in security protocols, and sometimes about new orders being issued at the port. Individually, these details might not have seemed very significant, but when combined, they created a bigger picture. Arif was very careful while doing this. He never asked direct questions, and he never showed too much interest in any particular topic. Everything was done casually, as if it was part of a normal conversation between two brothers. Imran never suspected anything, because for him, these were just harmless discussions with his elder brother. But in reality, those conversations were becoming a source of valuable intelligence. After gathering such information, Arif would convert it into coded messages and send it across the border using his modified transistor. He had developed his own system of encoding, which made it difficult for anyone to understand the message, even if it was intercepted. He also kept changing frequencies regularly so that the signals could not be easily tracked. For a long time, this system worked perfectly, and Arif successfully continued his activities without raising suspicion. But situations like this do not remain stable for long.
Over time, the Pakistan Intelligence Agency, ISI, began to suspect that sensitive information was being leaked from Karachi, especially from areas near the port. This suspicion was based on certain patterns observed in Indian responses and movements, which indicated that they had access to inside information. As a result, ISI increased surveillance in Karachi, particularly focusing on communication channels. Special monitoring teams were deployed and mobile surveillance vans were introduced. These vans were equipped with advanced technology that could detect and trace radio frequencies being used for unauthorized transmissions. They would move around different areas of the city during the night, scanning for any unusual signals. If a suspicious signal was detected, they would immediately narrow down the location and inform nearby units for action. When RF came to know about these developments through his sources, he immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. He realized that continuing his activities in the same way would be extremely risky. Even a small mistake could expose him completely. Therefore, he decided to change his strategy. First, he reduced the frequency of his transmissions. Instead of sending messages regularly, he started sending them after long intervals. Sometimes he would wait for several days, and sometimes even for more than a week. Second, he started changing the timing of his transmissions. Earlier, he used to send signals around midnight when the environment was quiet. But now he began experimenting with early morning hours when monitoring activity was relatively lower. In addition to this, he also started using different locations for transmission whenever possible. Although his rooftop was his primary spot, he occasionally used other places to avoid creating a fixed pattern. All these changes helped him stay under the radar for some time. However, the pressure was continuously increasing. One evening, when Imran returned home from work, he seemed unusually serious. During dinner, he mentioned that ISI had received confirmed reports about illegal communication signals being transmitted from within the city. He also said that special teams had been assigned to track and capture those responsible. While saying this, he spoke with determination, as if he was fully committed to completing his mission. For RF, this was a moment of deep internal conflict. On one hand, he felt a strange sense of guilt for using his own brother unknowingly. On the other hand, his desire for revenge and his commitment to his mission kept pushing him forward. He knew that he could not turn back now. Too much had already happened, and stopping at this point would make everything meaningless. In the following days, the situation became even more intense. Imran started bringing official files home occasionally as part of his work. These files contained sensitive information related to ongoing investigations and surveillance activities. Arif noticed this and realized that if he could somehow access those files, he might gain valuable insights about ISI's operations. At first, he hesitated. This step was far more dangerous than anything he had done before. But eventually, his determination overcame his fear. One night, when Imran returned home tired, Arif mixed a small amount of sleeping pills into his milk. Imran, unaware of anything, drank it and soon fell into a deep sleep. Once he was sure that his brother would not wake up, he quietly entered his room and began searching through the files. His hands were steady, but his heartbeat was fast. He carefully opened each file and scanned through the contents. What he found was both useful and alarming. The documents clearly showed that ISI had significantly tightened its communication monitoring network. They were not only tracking signals, but also analyzing patterns and identifying possible sources. This was a clear warning. Arif understood that from now on, every move he made had to be calculated with extreme precision. There was no room for error. After that night, he became even more cautious. He further reduced his transmissions and made sure that no pattern could be detected. Sometimes he would completely stop sending signals for several days. This created a gap in communication between him and his handlers. Meanwhile, in Delhi, the officials of RAW were waiting for updates. They were particularly interested in information related to Karachi port and naval activities. When they did not receive signals for an extended period, they became concerned. They did not know whether Arif was still active, caught, or had stopped working. This uncertainty led to a critical decision. Instead of waiting longer, they decided to re-establish contact. A secondary agent was sent to Karachi with the task of meeting Arif and delivering a direct message. After carefully locating him, the agent managed to approach Arif discreetly and conveyed the instructions. The message was clear. He had to continue sending information, no matter the risk. For Arif, this created a new dilemma. He knew that the situation on the ground was extremely dangerous, and he knew that continuing transmissions could expose him at any moment. But at the same time, he understood the importance of the information he was providing. After thinking deeply, he made his decision. He would continue, but this time, he would be even more careful. After making the decision to continue, Arif knew that he was stepping into an even more dangerous phase of his life. The margin for error was now almost zero. Every signal he sent, every piece of information he collected, and every move he made could potentially expose him. Still, he chose to move forward because for him, turning back was no longer an option. In the following days, Arif carefully resumed his activities. However, this time his approach was different. He avoided sending long transmissions and instead broke down information into smaller, coded fragments. These fragments were sent at irregular intervals, making it harder for monitoring systems to detect a consistent pattern. He also experimented with different signal strengths and frequencies, trying to blend his transmissions with normal background noise. Despite all these precautions, the risk remained high. The ISI monitoring teams had become more active than ever. Their surveillance vans were now covering more areas and operating for longer durations. In addition to this, they had started coordinating with local intelligence units, which meant that once a suspicious signal was detected, ground teams could respond much faster. One such night, while Arif was preparing to send a short coded message, he noticed something unusual. The signal interference levels were higher than usual, which indicated that monitoring equipment was active nearby. He immediately stopped the transmission and shut down his device. This quick decision possibly saved him from being detected that night. Moments like these made him realize how close he was to being caught. At the same time, his interactions with Imran continued as usual. Imran, being fully committed to his duty, often discussed his work in a general manner without revealing sensitive details directly. But even those general discussions were enough for Arif to pick up hints. He had become skilled at reading between the lines and understanding what was not being said openly. However, the emotional pressure on Arif was also increasing. Every time he sat across his brother at the dinner table, he felt a mix of guilt and tension. He knew that if the truth ever came out, it would destroy everything, not just his life, but also his family. Yet, he continued to maintain a normal expression, hiding everything behind a calm exterior. Days turned into weeks, and the situation kept tightening. Then one day, a significant development took place. Imran returned home earlier than usual and appeared deeply focused. During dinner, he mentioned that ISI had narrowed down the source of illegal transmissions to a specific area in Karachi, the Sadar locality. He explained that the area was under strict surveillance and that detailed searches might begin soon. For Arif, this information was extremely critical. His shop was located in the same area. This meant that he was now directly within the zone of suspicion. That night, Arif could not sleep. He kept thinking about his next step. Continuing as before would almost certainly lead to his capture. Stopping completely, on the other hand, would break the chain of communication and possibly affect ongoing operations. He realized that he was at a crossroads. He had two choices: either disappear from the operation completely or take one final risk. After hours of thinking, he made his decision. He would send one last message, a complete message, everything at once. After that, he would stop. This decision gave him a strange sense of clarity. The next day, he followed his routine as usual. He went to his shop, worked normally, and interacted with customers as if nothing had changed. But inside, he was preparing for the most important moment of his life. He gathered all the information he had collected over the past weeks. He carefully organized it and converted it into a detailed coded format. This was not going to be a short signal. It would take longer to transmit, which meant higher risk, but it was necessary to ensure that nothing important was left out. That evening, he closed his shop earlier than usual. When he reached home, his behavior remained normal. He spoke to his family, had dinner, and acted as if he was simply tired from work. Gradually, everyone in the house went to sleep, but Arif stayed awake. He waited patiently. Every minute felt longer than usual. Finally, when the clock approached 3 a.m., he stood up quietly. He took his transmitter and moved slowly towards the rooftop. The night was silent again, but this silence felt different. He set up the device carefully, making sure everything was in place. Then he took a deep breath and turned it on. The signal began. This time, there was no hesitation. He transmitted everything. Naval movements, convoy details, security changes, all the information he had gathered. The transmission continued for nearly 2 minutes. For an ordinary person, 2 minutes might not seem like much, but in that moment, those 2 minutes were everything. And at the same time, they were enough, because unknown to Arif, somewhere not too far away, a monitoring unit had already detected the signal. The frequency spike was unusual. The duration was longer than normal. This immediately raised suspicion. Within seconds, the system began tracing the source. Coordinates were narrowed down, alerts were sent, and units were mobilized. Within minutes of the signal being detected, the monitoring unit locked on to the approximate location. The frequency trace pointed toward a narrow lane in the Sadar area. The information was immediately passed on to nearby field units. Orders were clear. Move quickly, secure the area, and identify the source of the transmission. Vehicles were dispatched without delay. Heavy engines broke the silence of the night as multiple Pakistan Army vehicles and ISI units moved toward the location. The urgency of the situation was visible in their coordination. This was not a routine patrol. This was a targeted operation. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Arif had just completed his transmission. The device fell silent. For a brief moment, everything seemed still. But then, he heard it. Distant at first, then unmistakable. Vehicles, approaching fast. Arif immediately understood. There was no confusion, no second guessing. He knew they had traced the signal. His body reacted instantly. He disconnected the transmitter from its main circuit with practiced speed. Without wasting a second, he moved toward the water tank placed on the rooftop. Lifting the lid slightly, he dropped the transmitter inside, ensuring it sank deep enough to remain hidden. He quickly checked the surrounding area to make sure nothing else was left behind. Every wire, every small component that could raise suspicion was either concealed or removed. His breathing was heavy now, but his mind was clear. He knew what was coming next. Within moments, the vehicles entered the lane. The sound of doors slamming echoed in the night. Boots hit the ground. Commands were shouted. The operation had begun. One by one, houses were approached. Doors were knocked. Families were awakened. Searches were conducted. There was no delay, no hesitation. Every second mattered. Arif slowly made his way down from the rooftop. As he stepped inside his house, he tried to control his breathing and calm himself. He had to appear normal. Any sign of panic could expose him. Inside, his family was beginning to wake up, confused by the sudden noise outside. Some of them asked what was happening. but Arif simply told them that it was probably a routine check and asked them to stay calm. But deep inside, he knew this was far from routine. The sounds grew louder. Now the search had reached nearby houses. He could hear voices clearly, orders being given, questions being asked, doors opening. The distance between him and the soldiers was shrinking rapidly. Every passing moment felt heavier. Finally, there was a knock on his door. A firm, authoritative knock. For a brief second, everything inside him froze, but then he moved. Slowly, steadily, he walked toward the door. He adjusted his expression, making sure there was no fear visible on his face. Then he opened it. Standing outside were armed soldiers, and among them was Imran, his younger brother. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. There was no visible reaction from either side. Imran maintained a professional expression. Arif remained calm. One of the soldiers stepped forward and asked routine questions. Arif answered them in a composed manner, as if he had nothing to hide. His voice did not shake, his body language remained controlled. Imran glanced inside the house briefly, then he looked back at the team. After a short pause, he spoke. "This is my house." His tone was firm. There was authority in his voice. The soldiers looked at him, then at each other. Given his position and confidence, they did not insist on a detailed search. A quick visual check was done, but nothing thorough. Within moments, the team moved on to the next house. The door was closed. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried weight. Arif stood still for a few seconds. Then slowly he stepped back. His body felt lighter, but his mind was still processing what had just happened. He had survived by the smallest margin. The rest of the night passed without incident, but everything had changed. Arif knew that continuing his activities after this would be almost impossible. The level of surveillance had reached a point where any further attempt could lead to immediate capture. The risk was no longer manageable. He had completed his final transmission. Now, it was time to stop. In the following days, life slowly returned to normal on the surface. The search operations reduced. The monitoring activity, although still present, became less aggressive. But Arif took no chances. He completely shut down all communication. The transmitter remained hidden, and eventually it was disposed of permanently. At home, things continued as usual. Imran remained busy with his work. He continued to rise within the ranks of the ISI, gaining more responsibility and authority over time. His dedication and performance earned him recognition, and his position became stronger with each passing year. But he never discovered the truth. He never knew that the signals he was trying to track had once come from his own home. As for Arif, he returned to his old life, the small shop in the market, repairing radios, fixing transistors, dealing with customers, living quietly. Years passed. Time moved on. The world changed, but his secret remained buried. Today, Arif Qureshi is known simply as an old radio mechanic in Karachi, a man with a simple life, a man with no visible history. No one around him knows what he once did, what risks he took, what lines he crossed. His story was never recorded. His actions were never acknowledged. There were no medals, no recognition, no proof, only silence. Maybe, somewhere in the past, his messages made a difference. Maybe they changed something. Maybe they didn't. No one can say for sure. But one thing is certain. He lived a life that very few could even imagine. A life where every decision carried consequences. A life where one mistake could end everything. And in the end, he walked away from it all. Unnoticed, unknown. Because some people fight wars on the battlefield, and some fight them in silence.